El Nino, and our southeast climatology are highlights of today's Water Resources Outlook. Stay tuned to get caught up in the June 18th edition of the WRO. And now let's start off by taking a look at the past 30-day departure from normal, and it shows a mix of above and below normal rainfall across the southeast. This has been pretty typical as we have looked at the 30-day graphic each of the last few WROs. And now we look at the last 180 days of precipitation. You see a lot of gray area, which indicates these areas are within 2 inches of the normal rainfall. Except for the area along the North Carolina coast being well above normal and South Florida being well below normal, most of the southeast is pretty close to normal. Except there is one area shown by the USGS streamflow graphic that is being impacted by below normal precipitation, and that is the western half of North Carolina, where 28-day average streamflows are running in the 10 to 24% range. Much of the rest of the southeast is near normal, and in some spots slightly above normal.
So let's look at the Southeast River Forecast Center river flood climatology, and we just updated our river flood climatology through 2014 from just going through 2006. And besides having another 8 years of data, now we show the number of river floods as well as those that were damaging river floods, or those that reached the moderate flood stage or higher. So we see we are in week 25, which is a period that is fairly inactive when it comes to river flooding. The number of river floods and damaging river floods is typically small to nothing this time of year. We also see that we are in the low period for several more weeks before the tropical season poses additional risk. The one big exception to this quiet period for river flooding is in Central and South Florida, where we begin the convective wet period season down there, and it usually starts about mid-June, about this week. This river flood season for Central South Florida lasts until about early October. So when we take Central and Southern Florida out of the entire Southeast river flood climatology data, we see an even less pronounced river flood period during the summer months through the fall. As you can imagine, this is due to several aspects of the tropical season and the convective rainy season in Florida playing a bigger role in the overall number of river floods in the southeast in the summer and early fall. So how has the last 8 years gone relative to the longer climatology? Well, we see that we have had our typical winter and spring floods, but we also have had some summer flooding and early fall flooding. We can remember the flooding in September 2009 in Georgia. We had quite a bit of flooding in late January of 2010, as well as in April 2014 we had some pretty good flooding. But the last 8 years has not been classic in terms of river flooding and the seasons, as summer flooding has been somewhat above average relative to its quiet normal period. We showed this in the past and wanted to show it again as we're in the tropical season. This graph is illustrating how during moderate to strong El Niños we have had lesser number of tropical storms develop in the Atlantic Basin, indicated by the last two blue bars in the graph. But as far as the number of systems hitting the tropical systems hitting the southeast, the numbers do not change much relative to the ENSO condition, as we see in the red bars across the graph. On average, we see about 2 to 4 storms a year affect the southeast, potentially causing river flooding. Another interesting river flood climatology graph for the southeast. This is the number of river floods by month, color-coded to the ENSO condition. The red bars are river floods during El Nino, blue bars are La Nina periods, and gray is neutral. And notice that the higher bars are mostly red and some gray, meaning most of the active river flood months are El Nino and some being neutral. In fact, many of the red periods that you see there are periods where the bars are higher, meaning river flooding was at least active during some period during those El Ninos. So this is an interesting point to make as we head into a moderate to strong El Nino potentially this winter and spring. And Todd has talked about this, and we'll talk some more on that. And finally, we look at the ratio of river floods in each ENSO category to the overall average for each month, and we see that January through April, El Niños bring a higher number of floods to the southeast. So we'll be looking at this closely, at how this El Niño develops over the coming months, heading into the winter and spring river flood season.
All right, let's take a look at what we can expect for the next week or so across the southeast U.S. The graphics we're looking at today are model data from the GFS model. The shading here shows the expected precip forecast by the model, and the blue lines show the upper level field. Mainly what we're looking at in the blue lines are areas of associated high and low pressure. So we're starting the period with high pressure across most of the southeast U.S. and an area of low pressure to our west over Oklahoma. This area of low pressure is associated with what was once Tropical Depression Bill. As we go through the next few days, we're going to see that this area of high pressure slides off to the southeast, while the area of low pressure to our west moves closer to us, and by the time we get to Sunday, looks like most of that's going to be to our north. However, we'll bring some precip, is expected to bring some precip to Virginia and North Carolina. As we go into the midterm period, we see a few shortwave troughs move through the upper level flow from the northwest, but as we get into Wednesday, we see high pressure start to build across the area again, usually associated with drier conditions. Looking at the 7-day precip forecast, we see that most of the precip associated with former Tropical Depression Bill is associated is across the area to the north of us, but is expected to bring some precip to Virginia and North Carolina. The max that we have across our area is in coastal North Carolina. We have a secondary max down in Florida, which is pretty common for this time of year. Looking into the long term, we can expect below normal precipitation amounts across much of the southeast. That's associated with that building high pressure that we were seeing at the end of the midterm period. But the further north you get through our area, the more likely you are to return to equal chances for above or below normal precipitation amounts.
So now let's look at the forecast out a little bit further, and the first indicator that we have been looking at is the ENSO predictions and our forecast that has headed us from a weak El Nino to a potentially moderate or strong El Nino. Nearly all of the forecasts keep us in El Nino through the winter of 2016. For the July outlook, due to a potentially less active hurricane season and model output that shows more high pressure and less rain in the southeast, this summer could end up being a little drier than originally anticipated. In previous outlook, the southeast remained in the normal range. Now the models that the Climate Prediction Center uses to make these forecasts are leaning towards drier weather from the Gulf Coast through most of Georgia up through most of the Carolinas. Although I did not show this, they are also looking at warmer than normal for the July time period. And on to the fall, continued warmer temps. This depiction shows continued expectations for chances for below normal precipitation from July through September. Fortunately, as mentioned earlier, the southeast is going into this drier period in pretty good condition with normal stream flows and close to normal rain since the beginning of the year. The silver lining to all this is our expectations for the winter recharge season. After a potentially dry fall, a classic El Nino forecast with chances for above normal rainfall being high throughout the southeast. If it truly does become a strong El Nino, there is a high likelihood that this will occur. It will make for a very busy winter after a dry summer. And so the bottom line, looks like below normal rainfall for most of the southeast through the end of July, and then based on the forecast it looked like we should continue that trend throughout the rest of the summer. We'll just have to see. We may get pockets, there may be a pattern change, but for right now it does look like it's going to be pretty dry. As for the long term, El Nino is here. Will it become moderate or strong? We'll just have to see. It looks like that's the case, and that will impact especially our weather as we get later into the fall and early winter, but continued expectations for an inactive tropical season in the southeast. Our next water resources outlook will be recorded on the week of July 20th. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions for either Jeff, Chris, or I, please email us and let us know, and we will get back to you as quickly as possible.